You were very player focused. At what point did you know that you wanted to get into games? Because you finished your masters.
I've always liked playing games. I found this job posting at X Games, and I was like, hey, I could actually do something that I like doing in my spare time, which is playing games.
Transition from mobile straight into one of the best gaming studios out there. How did that opportunity come to that?
It's hard to say how exactly I managed that.
Yeah.
I think I was just good at conveying that I understand these things, and that I also understand that it's going to be a learning curve for me too.
This is for other producers out in the industry. They've made a change from, let's say, a AAA project to a smaller indie studio, or moved into a mobile studio. What advice do you give there?
You have to accept change and fast. There's the other thing, is that you have to do the roadmap.
How do we continue creating a culture of inclusivity, diversity within teams?
We've created this culture that people are super free to talk. You can freely talk what's on your mind. It's also about how you set up your office. It's also about how you set up your bathroom. Also just being flexible with working hours. I think that's what inclusivity is. And I think we need to look at it from all different perspectives.
Hey Besa, pleasure to have you here. Welcome. I've been waiting for this for a little while, so it's a pleasure to introduce you. How are you?
Hi, Selim. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me here. I'm doing really great. How about yourself?
I'm all good. I've got a special meeting room. I'm actually in one of the medical rooms in my office space as the meeting room
Oh,
fully booked up. So they've given me a special room. I've got a little bit of sunlight, but this will do for the occasion.
nice. I decided to work from home because it's easier. That way, no interruption from anybody.
Amazing. It's good to see you again. Look, it's been several years that you and I have been speaking, and when I was first starting the Pixel movement, we reached back out to each other again. So thank you very much for joining me. It's always good to speak with you, and our relationship dates back a couple of years now. You were probably one of the first people that I ever spoke to. So yeah, just a little introduction to yourself, our relationship, our friendship. Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really great, knowing you for so long, and also being one of the first people that you've met, starting to do this. And I'm super happy to see, the progress and everything with Pixel Movement. So definitely kudos to that for you. Yeah, so me, I'm Besa.
You.
I I am originally from Kosovo. I've been living in Finland for 10 years now. I had my 10-year anniversary this month, so time
Wow.
flies. So yeah, I came here to do my master's degree, and then yeah, after I came here, I started to notice that actually you can have a career in games, because the industry is still super young in Kosovo, so there isn't any kind of companies or stuff like that, or degrees or anything related to games. And after I came here, I actually realized that, hey, actually, there's tons of opportunities to work in games. So yeah, after I finished my master's degree, I started to work at Next Games. So I started with player support for a while, where I moved to a more senior role throughout the time that I've been at Next Games. And then I went to EA, when I started to do community management, and kind of taking also a player support coordinator role for the player support team at EA, and just coordinating the effort from the game team and that. And then as I've been doing more and more on that, I kind of realized that, hey, actually, maybe I want to do marketing, but then I'm like, okay, maybe that's not actually me. And then I was like, actually, I do like production, and a lot of what I'm doing currently, coordinating between different teams and efforts, it's actually kind of what a producer does, just in different ways. So then I started to look more into it. But then I'll share, I guess, later on a bit more into how exactly I went about it, and just switching my career from being in the player side, being in community, switching to full production. So after I started to do a little bit of training at EA about that, I got the opportunity to join Remedy. So I went from working on mobile for 5 years to going to AAA. So that was also a big step into my production career. Been at Remedy for about a year, and then I decided to join Pixel United Studio. So like I'm in a smaller studio, part of Pixel United, which is Northern Stars, and I lead the production efforts there nowadays. And it's going to be soon 2 years that I've been there. So
What a journey.
yeah, I mean
It, it, it,
it's 8 years in total. When I think about it, I'm like, oh my god,
oh, you've done so much. You've done
nice.
so much, and it sounds like you've seen so many different aspects of gaming. You were very player focused to start off with. It was
Yeah.
very player community focused, and then you've then turned your efforts to your internal teams.
Yes.
At what point did you know that you wanted to get into games? Because you finished your masters,
Yeah.
and was it straight into straight into games after that, right?
Yeah, it was actually I done about 3 months. I worked in a different project in education, but then after that I went to games. So like I just like, having recently graduated, started looking for jobs. I as you know, as a kid I used to play games a lot. Like I got into games because of my big brother. He used to have a Super Nintendo, and then I started to play with him, and then all of a sudden I just liked that. So like played PC, played console and all of that. But it's like it's one of the things that like even nowadays people don't necessarily realize that there's a lot of different opportunities in games and roles, because like I think you come from the mindset that like okay, in order to make a game you need to be a developer or you need to
Yeah.
be a coder, but I'm neither of those. Like I don't come from that background. So like as I started looking for jobs, that I realized actually, because like Helsinki being like kind of like the mobile game hub of the world, like I started to see jobs there. So then I was like, oh, okay, like actually, like I've always liked playing games. Like I didn't know that there is more roles into games than just being a game developer. And when you think about it, it makes sense, right? It's a company as any other. You need HR, you need community, you need like player support, you need QA, you need like all sorts of different roles like finance or like legal or all of these things, but you don't necessarily tie those things together. Like when you haven't necessarily heard about the industry, especially if you come from a country where like the industry is not really there yet in terms of development. So yeah, then I realized that hey, I found this job posting at Next Games, and I was like, hey, I could actually like do something that I like doing in my spare time, which is playing games. So that's when I realized that like, hey, actually, there's opportunities to do this. So I want to do this. And like, I applied at Next Games, and it was actually quite a fast, like, hiring process. And then I ended up getting the job within the month, and then I started there. So yeah.
Amazing. So, a question I'd love to know the answer to: where you were so community focused, you was always working with the audience. How different was that when you then started working in production internally? What sort of differences and sort of mindset shift did you need to have?
So it's when you work like quite a lot like with players, like facing players, like you're so involved with that you kind of like, try to take all their feedback or all the unhappiness or happiness or like anything that there is, like you take it quite closely, and then like your job is to relay that to the team, right? So then you take like the super also defensive approach from the player side. So like you defend them, and that's actually your job, because at the end of the day you're making the game for the players, like so like you take that super stance in that, and then when you switch that to production, like your role is totally different, because like your interest is the interest of the team that you're leading, the interest of the team that you're producing, while you have to think about KPIs, like KPIs like coming from the games, or like finances, or like how you allocate resources and all of these things. So now like your focus switches like fully to like the interest of the teams, how to enable your team, like to do their job, and like kind of like kind of being kind of in the middle between the teams and then the management, and like just getting the interest of the team, but at the same time of the company and of the game, because at the end of the day, of course, like you have to produce a game that does well, otherwise like you can't have a team or like continue producing the game.
Exactly. And you're essentially bridging the gap. But I guess there is a little bit more of a emotional attachment when you're very community
Absolutely.
focused. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I was thinking how
Absolutely.
because you're literally one of them. You're literally part of that community. You're living and breathing it. And although you are still emotionally invested into it, then there's a bit of a mindset shift there.
There
In
is,
terms,
because now there's the business perspective, right? Like that's where your interest lies more into, rather than like,
yeah.
when you were there. But I think it has been good, to be honest, to be in the community side, because when we discuss about changing something, like, I try to push that we think about stuff in different perspectives, because sometimes data shows you certain things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the players perceive it the way that the data shows it to you. So it's like it's really important to also like be close to the community. So that's what I try to do, like when I talk with our community manager, that like, hey, like, you need to bring that to the table. You need to take all of that from the players and bring it to us, because we need to try to think about things in our different perspectives, because like I said, data sometimes shows something and you want to continue with that, but players might just hate it. So like I try still, because I have that, like, that I've been part of that, so I try when we're talking about making a decision, something, to like really insert in the discussion that, hey, we need to look at this at all different angles. Like we can't just look at it because we think this is the best, or numbers show us like this. We also need to have that perspective. So I think it's been also really good in that sense, because I think I can bring a little bit still of that, like, battle of being on
Yeah.
the other side. And just maybe when we make the decision, that we kind of look at all the different avenues, and like, the different kind of like, data that we're getting, that be it like, numerical, or like just like, broader feedback. So
You've been on both sides of the spectrum essentially. So the value that you can add is priceless. Was throughout this time when you was part of the community and working as a community manager, were the options of changing into production relayed across to you, or was it easily accessible? Is where I'm getting at, or did you have to sort of discover it for yourself to see maybe I want to shift into this area, or having seen what's going on internally? What was that journey like?
So I think this is a really like good question, because sometimes people go in and they don't necessarily realize that they want to do something else within the industry. It's like usually you go in and you discover that, like, you might kind of have appetite for something else, or you see yourself more doing that. So I think for me, it's just been that I think I discovered it more and more, like, as I've been doing my work, and like, just being kind of like, part of the game development team, and like, just seeing like the role of a producer or executive producer, that like, what they do. And I've kind of like saw that maybe that's something that I'm leaning more towards, and that like, I think I see like, in the longer run, as something that I want to do more, rather than like, staying within the field that I was in. Because like I've noticed it a lot of times, like, in different companies that I've been, like people have joined in different roles, but then like until they actually got exposed to seeing like, things being done from different roles, that they're like, oh, actually, like maybe I think I would be actually good at that, or like I would feel better in doing that, so, or happier. So it was more, I think, like me just kind of like, just being exposed to the day-to-day work with the rest of the team, that I just, thought that, okay, like actually this is what I want to do.
Yeah. Do you feel that studios encourage that to actually open those doors up and give access to people to be able to actually move into directions from what you've seen
Yeah.
over the past 8 years or so?
So
Have you seen that that's easily accessible?
at least in the companies that I've been, yes, but obviously there's two different sides to that coin, right? So like it's really important that once you identify that you want to do something else, or like you move to a different role, that you discuss it with your manager, because they are going to be the ones who at the end of the day are going to help you to transition to that. Or like in quite a lot of companies that I've been part of, like, like yearly you would have kind of like a career progression plan that you would do, and like how would you get there, and that being on the same role or a different role, like, how do you want to grow, how do you want to do that. So once I, for instance, I identified that to myself, like for myself while I was at EA, I started to talk with my manager. I was like, hey, I'm actually like, super interested in production. And actually my manager was a producer. So it like she understood. And then, and I started to work with her on a plan. So like I would do maybe like production courses on the side, but also I've studied business. So I also have like, project management, like, something
Background in
I
it.
have like a background. So then I started to like, talk with her, like, how I can learn more. For instance, like she would sometimes take me to certain meetings, or then like she would give me like kind of like the ownership of a small thing to produce, like, so like I would slowly, even though I was still doing my main role, like I would still like, do bits and pieces of this, like, while I was there. So like at least at EA while I was there, that was really offered, that it was really nicely. But then there's the other side of the coin, right? Like it's like you can do that, you can learn that, but obviously for you to be able to transition, there also needs to be a position open, because you can just like transition it, but if there's no need for another producer or like another community manager or a programmer or artist. So it's like you still also have to wait for that, right? So it's like you have to wait that there's the opportunity for you to go there. But I think like one of the most important things is like once you identify that you kind of want to move to a different project, or like not just project but like to a different role, that you discuss that with like
Yeah.
your company. Like at least I was fortunate enough that in all the companies that I've been part of, like that is something that was out there, it was part of the culture, that it was part of the company, that hey, we do want people to grow, we do want people to stay with us, we do want people to have the opportunity to move to other roles, and we do want to be able to support that. So I think one of the biggest things is like first identify that, like, once you have identified, look maybe a little bit more into it, what the role means, like, so you're really sure that like, this is exactly what you want to do. And then just, start maybe like I remember when I was like kind of like looking into it, I was doing like different courses, I was listening to different like production podcasts, like, in games and all of these things. So I was trying to get as much knowledge as possible, and then just like, ask, hey, if there is anything that like, that I can help with in terms of that, I would be more than happy to. So like you also need to put yourself out there. So it's like you
Yeah.
don't just say it that hey, I'm interested, and then kind of like, leave it on the side. You kind of like proactively have to, work towards that. And like for instance, that's what I'm doing currently with one of my coworkers. Like they're having a little bit of thinking of maybe they want to do production. So I've been trying to include them like more and more into like some of the stuff that I'm doing, or when I'm going on holiday or something, just giving them a little bit more of things to do. Because I think at the same time, even though they might have the idea they want to do it, I think it's really important that you see the day to day and like get to do that a little bit, just to see like, 100% like, okay, this is what I want to do. So I would say definitely be open about it, talk about it. At least I think I would like to think that most of the companies in games, at least, like they're open to these things. And like, as a gaming company, there's always like the need of like, second game, a third game, like that's what you want to think, like, and a lot of times also there's like, live services in games. So like, the opportunity will come. It might not come immediately or as soon as you want to, but as long as you keep working towards that, like you can get there. So
I think that's really sound advice. It's about constantly upskilling,
yes.
elevating to the next level. You've got to do the groundwork for yourself. If you're passionate or interested in something, then go and do the research, put in the time and effort into it, but then speak about where you want to be heading. And I think it should always be welcomed and in like not enforced, but encouraged, essentially. So if someone wants to transition, so I had a really good experience with a studio that I was working with a couple of years back, and once a month they would allow the team to go and work in different disciplines to go and see what that world is like. It was like just 1 week a month. So I'll take this for an example. If you're a gameplay engineer, go and sit with the physics team. Go and sit with the animation engineering team
Yeah.
and see what they're up to, and see what you like about it. And they used to encourage people that if they were passionate about a different area, go and learn a little bit. So it's refreshing to hear that those opportunities were there for you. And I think it's sound advice for anyone that wants to transition from community into production, because there is a lot of crossover. There's
There
definitely a lot
is
of
like,
crossover. Yeah.
especially like once you get like, in a more senior role, because I mean, nowadays, like with how big the games get, how big the community get, it doesn't end being like, it doesn't end up being a one person, like, team anymore. It's like you have outsourcing, or you might have, like, for instance, if you're in a bigger company, there's a central team like in community or player support and all of that. And as you progress more to a senior role within that, you actually start coordinating more than, like, just being super out there, like, with the players directly. So it's like you start kind of like, building that skill set slowly, maybe not directly, like, in the same as it would be in production, like, working with features and development teams, but you get the essence of it. Like, you learn how to navigate different things and like how to coordinate things. So there's definitely like crossovers, and there's definitely like, it just shifts a bit, right? So
You just got to identify it.
yes.
Where is the
Yes.
um, so across, we talk about crossover. Now, having worked in the industry for 4 years now, I always I come up against this scenario that a AAA studio would always be looking for PC console experience or AAA experience at the very least. You transitioned from mobile straight into one of the best gaming studios out there to work on an incredible project.
Yes.
How did that opportunity come to light? Because you've got mobile experience here, you just jumped into a AAA project.
Yeah, I think so. Like, it's a good question, actually. Like so I mean, at the end of the day, they are a bit different. Like, they're quite different, actually. Like, when you think about that, but I think there's still quite a lot that you can transfer to, because, like, you're still gonna have similarities, like, when it comes to kind of like, getting to know the ground or the basics of making a game. So like there's going to be similarities. So I think, like, what they do look into is that, okay, you do know games, you do know, like, the basic, like, you do know how to do these things. So I think I was just maybe good at kind of like conveying that I understand these things, and that I also understand that it's going to be a learning curve for me too. So yeah, it's hard to say how exactly I managed that.
Yeah.
I think it was just like, just proving also maybe like the appetite to learn, like, not being afraid, and like, just jumping into things, because I think it's also that, like, to be honest, like, even working from a mobile game to another mobile game, it's kind of similar, but then from company to company, from team to team, it's going to be quite different.
It
So
differs. Yeah.
like,
Different processes,
yeah,
different approach to things, different genres, different teams,
yeah.
different
So it is.
cultures, etc.
Also showing that you're not afraid of changing that, and that, like, you do want to learn, and you're a fast learner and all of that. So I think it's
Yeah.
it's kind of that.
Amazing. Oh, so once you finished up with Remedy, you've now joined Pixel United. It's a smaller studio, more of a little bit of a startup sort of culture. It's a new project. It's a growing team. From a project perspective, what can you what can someone expect? So I say this is for other producers out in the industry. They've made a change from, let's say, a AAA project to a smaller indie studio, or moved into a mobile studio. New project, growing team. How do you adapt? How do you grow that team? What advice do you give there? Because you've seen and done it all,
Yeah.
and still doing it.
Yeah, so we're in a good setup, because, like, our mother company is quite big, but we're a small studio that is starting new. So, like, we're kind of independent, but we're lucky enough that, we have somebody who's backing us up, that we don't have to worry too much about things like, financials and all of that. So, like, we have that. But as a studio, we're fresh, we're new, it's a new team, it's like, it's starting from ground, like, so I was fortunate to join when we're quite smaller. Now we're about 23 people,
How
and
many were you when you first started?
when I first started, I think we were about 15, 13,
15.
something like that.
Yeah.
And I was there like early when we were doing the prototypings and the testing, and then after that to being like, okay, we nailed our core game. We are confident that this is what we want to do. So now time to go to production. So what that means is starting fully new processes, growing the team, just developing the game completely from scratch. So it's I think one thing that you need to understand when you do this, when you start with a new team, because even though some of us have worked in previous companies, like all of us together haven't worked before. So it's completely new, right? So everybody brings something new to the table. Everybody brings something fresh to the table. You need to navigate all of that, how to work with each other, like how do we work as a team? How do we produce this? What is the most optimal way for us to kind of like do this together? And I do have to say, like, one of the things, especially as a producer, you have to accept change and fast. Like, you have to be nimble about it. Like, especially a new thing is like when you're in a team for a couple of years, you've been doing this together, you kind of have nailed your processes, you kind of have nailed the culture, you kind of have nailed the ways of working. But when you are new, a new team starting a new project, like you're gonna start with something that's in your head is like, okay, I think that this would this setup might work. And then you start doing it, then you realize it like actually doesn't work. So you have to switch, you have to talk with the team. Okay, do a retro. Like this went well, this didn't go so well. How can we improve it? How can we improve our process? How can we improve the ways of working together? So then you're like, okay, you gather all of that, and then you go back, and then you start thinking, and then you're like, okay, let's try this now. And then it's like, okay, this works better, but maybe it can improve, like if we do this. So it's like one thing that you have to understand is, first of all, in terms of process and ways of working, it's going to change a lot until you kind of it settles down more and more with time, and then you realize, okay, now we have gotten in that good situation where we're good. But then there's the other thing is that you have to do the roadmap. So then you start with like, okay, you have done your market test, you have gotten the main idea, you're starting to do that, and obviously you have to grow the game, right? So like it can be just the small thing. So then you have a roadmap, and also that will change a lot. So it's like from milestone to milestone and all of that. So I think one of the things is like, I don't know, I personally I'm a person that's super organized. I like to be 50 steps ahead. I'd like to know things what's going to happen in a year or two or three. But you have to be super flexible, and you have to accept that. Like it's not because you have done something wrong. It's not because you weren't able to predict, or you weren't able. It's just like it's a new team, it's a new project, until you've done some ways and of stuff doing together, the work doing together, then you will slowly start seeing what actually works. And I think that's one of the key things is that I when I was at GDC a year ago, there was like this talk about how as a producer you have to be really good at accepting uncertainties, and that things are going to change, and you have to adapt to that, and you have to kind of go with it. So I think that's one of the things that, especially working with a new team, with a new studio, because we weren't only like making our team culture, we were making our studio culture.
Yeah.
So you just have to be listen, listen to the people, listen, take the feedback, iterate, do go back to the drawing board, and then just see how you can move on from there. So
I guess in essence, it's a little bit like trial and error because it's a new team, it's a new processes. While you're speaking, a little bit of an analogy, it's like a football team when they make several transfers in the summer. How often is it that that team from day one begins playing amazing and are starting to win all of their games? It takes time for everyone to get to know each other. It's different backgrounds, different ways of playing, different cultures, etc. So I think the key takeaway from it is listening and adaptability, because there is constant change within projects. If we talk about methodologies, because while growing up and working with project management in tech, I felt that with the waterfall model, it's pretty hard to control. Do you feel that when working on a project, using methodologies such as Agile helps as well in terms of those changes?
It does, especially in games industry, because like there's so many factors that would come in. It's like you have the data, you have the player feedback, you have the KPIs, you have the ways of working, you have like, like also the industry, especially in mobile, it's changing so fast.
Yeah,
It literally changes so fast because like the market is super big. So like there's something else that will come in and you'll be like, oh, actually we haven't thought of that, and this seems to work. So now we need to, you know, shift our direction a bit more to that. So you definitely have to be agile. So it's like, waterfall in like I think when you think about waterfall just in general, it sounds so good. It's like,
it
it's
does.
super organized and like, just go through that. But like,
Which is what we're going to do.
yeah, like the
Basically,
reality, it's like
it's not.
it's not like not in this industry, at least not in mobile. Like you have to be agile, and it's just how it is. Like especially for us, like now being in soft launch, like we're learning so much from the data that like in order for us to bring the product where we want to, we have to be agile. Like our plans will change.
Yeah.
Like how we do things will change. So like as we get more information, we need to adapt to that. And like and that what you thought it's no longer there, it's like something new.
Just adapt, go with the changes.
Yeah,
Listen.
agile, definitely.
And yeah, and it's not your fault. It's not your way of working.
No,
It's
no,
just
absolutely.
finding the best way that actually works for everybody, for the product, for it to be successful. So no, I appreciate it, and I'm sure many people would appreciate your insight there. Now, a topic that is an important topic, especially to the industry and even outside of the industry. So you're in a studio that's still finding its way from a culture perspective, but a big topic that everyone talks about is how do we continue creating a culture of inclusivity, diversity within teams, where certain ways have been the norm for such a long time. How do we then start making a change and making an impact for the better? You've been in several places now. You're now in a studio that's got the opportunity to make that change. What have you seen so far?
So this is a topic that's really close to my heart. Like I can talk about
I
it
know.
years, but I wish we would as small as possible. So I mean, it's creating a culture of inclusivity. It's super important. Like like especially in an industry which is so international. Like it doesn't know borders. So like you're gonna have like people from different backgrounds in it, and I think like and also you have to, like we always have to think about it that we spend the most of our awake time at work. So it's
Yeah.
not great if you're like in a place where you don't feel like like you belong or you're accepted or like all of that. So it's like I think it's really important for like teams and like studios to kind of like always think about it, always challenge it, because like things do change. So like even when it comes to culture and everything, things do change. So I think one important thing is always to have somebody within the team or studio that is always kind of challenging it, like like are we doing better, are we just like, because sometimes like you might do like your kind of like strategy or like policies or everything, like this is like what our culture is and all of that, and then maybe leave that on the side and then you don't touch it for 5 years, and then like well, a lot of things
Exactly.
have changed. So like you always have to challenge that, like, hey, are we actually like doing better, are we doing fine? I always try to, like, what I like about our studio is that we've created this culture that people are super free to talk, like you can freely like talk what's on your mind, that being about like the project, that being about the studio itself, like people are able to talk, and we've seen that like happening throughout the last 2 years that we've been together, that like we've created this openness of people can freely talk. It doesn't matter if it's like management, it doesn't matter if it's like producer, it doesn't matter if it's your lead, like, you can freely talk. So I think one of the first steps to creating an inclusive culture is like giving that sense of freedom and no risk of, like, saying what's on your mind. Obviously, like, of course, you also need to do it in a respectful manner because, like, it's also still, like, a work setting, but, like, just being able to freely talk about things. And then I also, one thing that I like when it comes to inclusivity, like, I've had people previously ask me, like, in panels, that um when you hire people, do you look for culture fit? And, like, I like talking about that too, because I think, like, you shouldn't also only look for a culture fit. You need to look, obviously, for a culture fit in the sense, like, obviously, you also don't want maybe somebody who's, how to put it, like, toxic to join your team, because then that would
Correct.
create, like, a nice environment for anybody. But I like to also look at it in the sense of culture add, because I do believe that, like, like, every individual brings something new to the table, especially, like, in smaller, like, for instance, like, we're a growing studio, we're a new team, so, like, a new person joining, like, completely shifts our ways of doing things. So, like, with that also comes new things. So, like, it's also about looking at, like, the culture add of the culture fit. So, like,
I, I love that. I love that because what that person can come in and add value, not only from a work perspective, but you can learn new habits from people. You learn good habits from people. And what you were saying there, you may have a culture between the 4 or 5 of you within that team. But if you keep going for the same sort of culture fit, then you're stagnating
yeah.
and you're just keeping it the same and nothing is changing and you're not evolving. So when you are interviewing with people, interviewing people for a particular role to join that team, to bring in someone different with a fresh perspective, I think it goes above and beyond, and that's how you continue elevating
Absolutely.
that culture. So don't always look for the same thing because then you're not changing.
Yeah.
And like you said, everything is forever. We as people are forever changing. If we think about
Yeah, of
ourselves,
course.
we as people are constantly changing. The products we're working on are changing. The business is changing. Life is moving on. So yeah, look, you put a massive smile on my face, and it's value added. It's adding to the culture.
Absolutely. And I love that. Like, I love that. Like, every time I have somebody new joining, like, I'm always, like, intrigued. Like, I start looking at how things are, like, changing, and, like, what they are bringing, and, like, everything. And it's sometimes, it's because, even though, like, there's a more international setting, like, traveling has become easier and everything, like, you might not, like, necessarily know everything. You will never know everything. So, like, I've been in cases where, like, when somebody was talking about something, like, somebody came up and said, like, I know you didn't mean any harm or anything, but, like, when you put it this way, like, it might make some people feel uncomfortable. And the person was like, oh my god, I never thought about that. Like, I always try, like, when I speak, to be, like, as inclusive and as respectful as possible, but I didn't know that, because, like, you were, like, they were simply not never in that situation, or, like, in that culture, in that setting. So, like, you learn these things. And I think, like, that's something that you always have to be open to, like, to create an inclusive environment, is just, like, also taking the feedback and also learning new things. That actually happens mostly when you have people, like, with diverse backgrounds coming into the team, and then you start, like, kind of, like, growing your perspective into those things. So I think it's really important to also kind of, like, think about that too.
Yeah, I agree. And where you were talking about being being so being comfortable of being able to speak, if you create that platform for people, number one, they're always going to be able to speak. But then what you mentioned there as well, I've seen situations with my team where I would message them on Slack, for example, and it's how I'm thinking in my mind, but I'm not portraying that in the right way. And then I'll send the message, and then I'll call them up straight away. And I was like, look, this is what I meant by it.
Yeah, yeah.
So things can be perceived in the wrong way, whether you're right. Look, writing a text message, for example, can be read in the wrong way.
Oh, definitely.
if people are from different cultures, there could be misunderstanding. But if you're giving people a platform to speak, and you're always mindful and you're always respectful, you'd always continue to learn. And if you give us feedback to people, then I think it goes a long way, and we all learn from each other.
I think honestly, it's all about keeping an open mind and keep challenging it,
Yeah.
doing better, keep learning about it. Like I'm a big advocate of like this topic, so I try to do that quite often. Like maybe not every time, like like every day, because I'm also busy, like performing my role. But I do try to like when we do recruitment and everything, like that we try to keep that like in mind, that we need to be like open, we need to kind of be inclusive, we need to create a setting that is inclusive. And by inclusive, like we're not talking only about like different backgrounds, we're also talking about how you set up your office, how you set up the ways of working. Like inclusive is also being able for, I don't know, parents being able to leave midday at work because their kids have a show at school, right? So like that's
Yeah.
also being inclusive. It's not like, because I think sometimes when we talk about the topic, people think that it's like only like has to do only because like how to bring like different backgrounds and create an inclusive like environment. It's also about how you set up your office. It's also about how you set up your bathrooms. Do you have unisex bathrooms? Do you have like woman, man, like these kind of divisions? Or like do you make your office being accessible, or like
Yeah.
like providing the tools that people need to perform like their duties to like like comfortably, or like also just like being flexible working hours, just so like people can also attend to like personal stuff as well. Like I think that's what inclusivity is. And I think like we need to look at it from all different perspectives. And I think once you start like thinking more about it and looking more into it, like you start to learn so much more. And there's so many like nice amazing talks and people like advocating about it, that there's so much to learn.
Yeah. Do you feel that the industry has improved this over the years, or do you feel that there is still work to do? I've seen some elements of improvement in terms of flexibility. I also think COVID has taught a lot to everyone.
Oh yeah.
Where you was talking about parents and where people work from, the accessibility. Some people may not have the space that you and I have the space.
Yeah.
Some people may have kids. Some people may have parents to look after, etc. I think COVID has taught people a lot. I had an example of this morning. So someone messaged me to say, I'm going to have to hold my daughter in my 1-year-old daughter. I said, oh, don't worry about it. I've got my 4-year-old daughter jumping over my head
Yeah.
during calls. So it's taught us a lot. But what do you think from an industry perspective?
So it has improved. Like I've seen
Yeah.
improvements even for the years that I've been in. There's still room for a lot of improvement. Like there's always will be. And I don't think like, it's gonna be like things change. Like you gotta have to adapt. You're gonna have to improve. Like for instance, when I think about our studio, like even though we do put a lot of effort in our culture, we still have so much room to improve. Like it has improved, but I think there's room for improvement. And I think there's always going to be room for improvement. I don't think we will ever nail it 100% in the industry or in any company or in any team. There's always going to be like room for improvement. So has definitely changed. Like I've been maybe short, maybe long in the industry, but I also know people who have been way longer than I have been. And like I've heard stories like from how it used to be before and how it is now. It has definitely improved in a lot of good ways, but I think there's still a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah. As an advocate of inclusivity, diversity, what would your, this is going to be so hard for you, by the way, what would your one-liner advice be? You had the opportunity to speak to all studios. What would that one bit of advice be?
That's a good one. I have to think about it.
Oh, I'll put you on the spot.
I'm gonna put it like I want to put it really nicely. I would just say be open-minded and provide like open platform for people to speak up.
Yep.
Because that's how you're gonna create an inclusive environment. If they feel like they can, people can speak up, like that's where it starts.
Amazing. Look, it's been amazing speaking to you. I've genuinely enjoyed this conversation. It's been eye-opening to see your transition in the industry, what the industry could do better, support for people that want to move into different roles. I think that's going to be super useful. Growing teams from the start, the culture, the inclusivity and diversity within team. And yeah, I think your advice will go a long way. So I thank you for your time and appreciate you as always. And yeah, that draws a close.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to do this. And I'm really happy that, like, I would be really happy if this comes, like, into use to somebody. And
Yeah.
yeah,
And this is why I wanted to create a platform for people like yourself in the industry that has seen things, that has experienced things, to be able to give back to those that are starting off, or just see things from a different angle, essentially. So yeah, thank you. You are appreciated.